Welcome to day 2 of Capitol Hill Ocean Week 2016 here on Oceans Live. I am your host, Kate Thompson, coming to you live from Capitol Hill Ocean Talk. Don't forget to be part of our conversation by tweeting us questions using hashtag #Chow2016 or chat us at oceanslive.org. This morning, we'll be turning to one of the biggest and most preventable problems facing the ocean today, marine debris. But before I introduce this morning's panelists, I want to tell you about the highlights from last night's Ocean Prom. The National Marine Sanctuary Foundation hosted the 14th Annual Oceans Awards Gala at the Ronald Reagan Building and International Trade Center in Washington, D.C. Many of the ocean's most influential leaders, such as the Lifetime Achievement Award winner Nainoa Thompson, came out to celebrate the importance of our ocean. Senator Maria Cantwell was honored with the Leadership Award in recognition for her leadership in the fight for ocean conservation and for her advocacy for sustainable fisheries, expanding ocean acidification research, and increased ocean monitoring and science. The foundation also honored Volunteer of the Year Captain Scott Hickman from the Flower Garden Banks National Marine Sanctuary. Now back to today's panel on marine debris. So, what happens to litter on the street or trash on the beach? Too often it ends up in the ocean, which is filled with items that don't belong there. Huge amounts of consumer plastics, metal, rubber, paper, textiles, derelict fishing gear, and other lost or discarded items enter the marine environment every single day. Joining us to talk today about that enormous and preventable problem is my colleague from NOAA, Amy Uren. Amy is the chief scientist for NOAA's Marine Debris Program. We'll talk with her about the sources and impacts of marine debris and what NOAA is doing about it. We're also joined by Katie Register, the executive director of Clean Virginia Waterways, which works with Longwood University to improve Virginia's rivers and other water resources through citizen stewardship. For more than 20 years now, Clean Virginia Waterways has coordinated the international coastal cleanup in Virginia. Thanks, ladies, so much for joining me today in the studio.
Thank you. Okay, happy to be here.
Yeah, really excited to talk about this crazy problem of marine debris. So I'm going to start us off with a quick question. Take a look at a picture here. So what do you see? And just give me one word of what that means to you.
Well, I would say preventable. And I'd have to say 3 words: surprised, but not surprised.
Yeah. Right?
It's 4 words.
That's right. Well, good so I'm just, to me, I look at that and I go, that could be mine. And I'm going to hold this up right here. This right here is a toothbrush that, it's a transportable toothbrush that everybody sees when they go on vacation or a trip. They take this toothbrush with them. But it hits home because everybody uses a toothbrush every single day. So how does that end up? That was at the monument. How does that toothbrush end up at the monument up in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands? I mean, it's crazy to think about that. That albatross right there is looking at somebody's toothbrush from who knows where in this world. So, I mean, every day we use things such as cans or coffee cups or plastic water bottles. All of these things can become marine debris. So those are a few examples, but Amy, can you tell me a little bit about what marine debris is and why it's such a big problem?
Right. So you kind of hit on some of the high points, Kate, and that is the definition of marine debris tells us that they are the solid and persistent man-made materials, so they're manufactured or processed materials that are intentionally or unintentionally, directly or indirectly, abandoned or discarded into the Great Lakes and the marine environment. And as you indicated, it's an everyday problem and it's a global problem. It's an everyday problem because, as you said, everybody across the globe uses these products in their everyday life in some capacity, right? So it's an everyday problem. It's a global problem because there are a lot of people in the world and people across the planet are using these products every single day. And if they are mismanaged, if their waste is mismanaged, if the recycling is mismanaged, they can find their way into the environment, into waterways, and eventually into the ocean. It's also a global problem in the sense that we are all connected by the ocean, right? The continents are surrounded by water. And so something that ends up on a beach, ends up in the water on a shoreline, say in Florida, could find its way up the coast to Virginia, could find its way into the Caribbean. Things that wash into the ocean off the coast of Japan could find their way to the west coast of the United States due to tides, currents, wind waves on the surface. And so marine debris connects us in that way. It's not necessarily going to be a local problem, but your local problem can extend beyond your immediate vicinity.
Right. I read a book once that was called Moby Duck, and it talked about a container ship. The container was lost off the ship in the middle of the ocean, and it was carrying rubber duckies. So, we all can relate to a rubber ducky and being in the bathtub with a rubber ducky. But what was interesting about the book is we are completely interconnected. It is one ocean that these environmentalists and research scientists were tracking these rubber duckies all over the world. Right. People were finding them everywhere. So it doesn't matter if the US is completely clean of marine debris and say, Africa isn't and they have a ton of marine debris. It doesn't matter. It goes everywhere.
It can find its way. Yeah.
It can find its way everywhere. So I mean, that was pretty impactful book for me to read, just to understand how that all works. But speaking of that, so where does it come from? I mean, do what I do in my backyard, can that go into the ocean?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, as you point out, trash travels. It travels from tiny streams to rivers to bays to the ocean. And most of the trash has been documented. It comes from inland. Even though it's called marine debris, most of it comes from inland. We're talking about a tennis ball that somebody loses. We're talking about a cigarette butt that was tossed out of a car window. And in fact, there's a group, the Ocean Conservancy does the International Coastal Cleanup, where thousands of volunteers pick up debris items and they record data. And you're looking right now at the top 10 most frequently found debris items. This was collected last year by nearly 800,000 volunteers worldwide. Notice number one, cigarette butts. Almost everything on the list after cigarette butts have to do with what we eat and what we drink. So a lot of that's coming from inland. However, about 20% or so comes from the marine environment. Mostly we're talking about things like fishing nets, crab pots, lobster pots, things that are designed to capture animals. And so when they become derelict or abandoned in the ocean, in the coastal environments, they can be very, very deadly to the animals and the wildlife that live there.
Right. Right. I think we were diving in the Florida Keys just the other day, and the season for lobstering had been over for 2 months, and we found one on the bottom that was still ghost fishing. It had like 8 lobster still in it.
So even
crazy.
Though it's no longer attached to its float,
right.
It's still catching and killing animals, and then the animals that get in the trap become bait for the next animals that come along.
Right. So, Amy, I'm going to ask you a couple toughies.
Okay.
So
I'm ready.
So where does all this stuff end up? And basically, how much, can you give me a figure, like poundage or weight of how much marine debris ends up in the ocean?
Deriving that kind of exact statistic is very difficult for a number of reasons, but perhaps the largest one is just the vastness of the ocean, right? It's a huge water body. And so if you want to try to derive some statistics about how much is in the ocean, you have to make sure that you're sampling all the different oceanic compartments. Mm-hmm. And so when debris finds its way to the coast, it can become stranded on the shoreline, so that's a compartment. It can find its way into the nearshore surface waters and eventually out to the open ocean surface waters, so it can be on the surface. It can possibly sink and become vertically distributed in the water column. It can completely sink to the seafloor, right, and be laying on the bottom, both in nearshore environments, and debris has been found in deep submarine canyons in the ocean. It can become buried when it's on the seafloor, and also animals take up the debris. And so in order to try to figure out how much is out there, you would have to effectively and accurately sample all those different compartments, which is a very, very difficult task. What we do know, though, a study came out last year by researchers at the University of Georgia. They looked at 192 coastal countries across the globe and looked at waste management practices. And what they found was that about, on average, 8 million metric tons of mismanaged plastic waste actually ends up in the ocean. And out of those 192 countries, there were a top 20, which contributed to 83% of that 8 million metric tons. So we have numbers like that where we know how much is entering the ocean. But once it enters, it becomes distributed, right? Again, I said the ocean is vast. And so we do know, though, that there are areas where it tends to accumulate. Rackline on beaches, so where vegetation comes up and gets stranded, is kind of a hot spot for marine debris, if you will. And then also in the open ocean, areas where currents converge on one another are natural areas of debris accumulation. And also everyone has probably heard of the North Pacific garbage patch. Well, the reason that debris is accumulating there is because there's an oceanic gyre there. And what a gyre is a system of rotating currents. So they can be clockwise or counterclockwise, depending on which hemisphere you're in. But think of them as a giant, expansive, slow-moving whirlpool, if you will, right? So they're rotating like this, and what happens in a whirlpool, things get drawn into the middle. So they tend to be areas of accumulation of debris. But even though debris accumulates there, you can't just go out and count it or sample it or collect it, because there tend to be very small particles in the gyre. So the larger plastic items can break down through UV radiation hitting the particles, some bacterial action. And so a lot of the materials that are in those gyres are very tiny like this, and it's difficult to sample this kind of material when it's so small. The other problem is that the gyres move, and so they're slowly rotating, but depending on wind patterns and the temperature of the water, the gyres can actually shift within a water body, and they can shift as much as 1,000 miles north or south, depending on conditions. And so I think I made a good point to indicate that it's not, you know, you can't just go out with a dip net and then quantify how much is out there, unfortunately.
Yeah,
right?
unfortunately.
I see you shaking your head.
Unfortunately. So, okay, well, Katie, I mean, what are the impacts? I mean, all this stuff in the ocean and the environment can't be good. So what are some of the impacts that are found out there?
The most famous impacts are those on wild animals. Seabirds, dolphins, sea turtles, even whales have been documented to eat. They ingest the plastic and trash, mistaking it for food. Especially plastic bags can look a great deal like a jellyfish, and jellyfish are the favorite food of many sea turtle species. So ingestion by wildlife is a big issue. Another big impact is entanglement, animals that become entangled in nets or fishing line, or the ribbons on balloons are usually plastic. So in addition, though, to the impacts on wild animals, we also have impact on habitat. For example, a plastic bag or a piece of fabric even on a coral reef can destroy and kill the living coral. There are also impacts on human safety. I mean, you don't want to be on a boat, get your prop caught up in a fishing net and burn out your engine. So you've got safety issues there.
Right.
There's also food chain issues.
Right. So there's a concern that some of the animals that form the base of the food chain in the ocean, so like plankton, zooplankton, smaller juvenile fish, when they ingest marine debris, typically smaller plastic particles like I indicated earlier, larger fish eat the smaller fish, and then even larger fish eat those fish. So what we really don't have a good handle on right now is how those effects translate up the food chain, and then eventually to us, because there are some species where plastics have been documented from their guts, and they're species that we eat. The other concern is that there could be population level effects for the species that do ingest marine debris. So not only does it impact individual organisms in terms of their biology or their physiology, but it can have impacts in the next generation. So a study came out earlier this year looking at oysters. And so they found that oysters did ingest tiny microplastic particles, microbeads, and what they found was that it affected the aspects of the reproductive system of those oysters. So sperm were less motile, eggs were smaller, there weren't as many eggs, and also in the next generation of oysters, those oysters were smaller. So we're starting to get indication that yes, there can be individual level impacts, but possibly we could be talking about impacts up the hierarchy at the population level.
So essentially we're ingesting the plastic that, yeah, it's kind of scary to think, for sure. So you work for NOAA, and obviously this is such a large problem that NOAA and Congress said we need to create a program.
Right.
So can you tell us a little bit about NOAA's Marine Debris Program and what you do?
Sure, I'd love to. So the program was actually established through an act of Congress, the Marine Debris Act, in 2006. So this year is our 10-year anniversary, which is very exciting. And the act was reauthorized in 2012. And so what the act did is it instituted the program and provided a number of mandates that we were to operate under, or a number of activities that we were supposed to coordinate and handle. And so from those mandates, our program actually developed 5 pillars: coordination, emergency response, prevention through education and outreach, removal, and research. And so coordination is a big one. We have 9 regional coordinators across the United States, Alaska, and Hawaii. And they serve as our eyes and ears on the ground for the program, because we're here in Washington, D.C. at headquarters. But they also serve as a focal point for folks in that region that are working on marine debris issues, so they know who they can contact if they have questions, and they can get people to network that are working on similar issues and things of that nature. For emergency response, in the last 10 years, we've actually helped respond to 4 different events: the American Samoa tsunami, the Japanese tsunami, and then Hurricanes Katrina and Sandy. And so we assist states or territories that are impacted by those events in trying to get a handle on what washed up, how much of it, where it came from. And then prevention, removal, and research. And so each year we hold grant competitions for prevention and removal projects. And so removal projects might include, these are larger ticket removal, larger ticket items. So this might be a project where a community has a derelict vessel in their harbor and they've just been wanting to get rid of it. They just haven't had the means to do so. And then the prevention grants seek to fund projects looking at education and outreach. So how can we teach folks about marine debris and how it can be prevented? And so this might be someone developing a curricula for a school to teach students. It could be a community that wants to put up signage because their community is on a water body and they want to make people aware of what marine debris is and how we can combat it. And then lastly, research. So we've held grant competitions for research in the past. We also fund research through other mechanisms, but looking at several different aspects of the marine debris issue: source, how much, how it's distributed, how it moves through the environment, how it impacts animals, as Katie was talking about. And so again, our 10-year anniversary, we're really excited about all our accomplishments. You can check us out on marinedebris.noaa.gov to learn more.
Yeah, well, I know that Sanctuaries has received quite a few of those amazing grants to go out each year and bring up the either derelict fishing gear or just pounds of trash. And it really is amazing that the Marine Debris Program does these grants, because it helps us to clean up and make somewhat of an impact anyway. So Katie, tell me a little bit more about the Clean Virginia Waterways program and what you do.
All right, well, for 22 years, Clean Virginia Waterways has led the international coastal cleanup in the state of Virginia. Our volunteers have removed more than 3 million pounds of trash from Virginia's streams, rivers, and beaches. They also collect data because it is part of the international coastal cleanup. We've also done some groundbreaking research. Our first big research project was on cigarette butts, which is the #1 source of plastic. A lot of people don't understand that those filters are made of cellulose acetate. We've also recently been working on research about balloon releases. Balloons are a very unique source of marine debris. It's one of the few things that people purchase. They go outside with the intent of releasing it into the environment. And I think most people have no idea or don't think about how 100% of those balloons will return to Earth or the ocean. Completely. And we find hundreds and hundreds on the ocean beaches of Virginia. We also recently, with our partners, the Virginia Coastal Zone Management Program and NOAA, wrote the Virginia Marine Debris Reduction Plan. So Virginia is one of the very few states in the United States that has a plan to deal with marine debris and reduce it over the next 10 years.
Right. Well, we actually have a question from our live chat. You can chat your questions in, and we will answer them here live, which we're going to do right now. So our question is, how can civilians get involved in the cleanup?
Oh boy, getting involved in the cleanup. And first of all, the International Coastal Cleanup, you can learn about it through Ocean Conservancy, and they will tell you where in your state, who to contact wherever you live. Not just in your state, it is international. But people can also get involved by prevention. Prevention is one of the biggest solutions to marine debris. Cleanups are great, data collection, very important, but prevention by the 3 R's. Reduce the amount of trash you're producing every day, say no to straws, reuse things, reusable shopping bags, coffee mugs, things like that. Recycle, of course, whatever trash you do end up producing. But yes, it's very preventable, whether you're in 4th grade or you're a country. I mean, there's so much we can do with education, legislation, and innovation. And I just wanted to share one little thing. When the Virginia Institute of Marine Sciences worked on a panel to put on crab pots. And this panel is made up of readily biodegradable plastic. So if a crab pot gets severed from its float and it's down there in the Chesapeake Bay or coastal waters, after a while, this panel will biodegrade and any animal that's captured can come out. Well, the scientists who created this said, well, let's do that with shotgun wads. If you're a hunter and you're off shooting, there's a piece of plastic that separates the powder from the shot, made out of plastic, unretrievable once the shotgun's been shot. So they are gearing up to make available commercially these biodegradable wads for shotguns. So that's just an example of innovation, a way to solve the problem.
Didn't I see on Facebook or something the other day there was a beer company, because that's always the 6-pack ring. Those are what you always see, like around turtles or whatever. But there's actually a beer company that now they're making edible rings. Like the turtles can actually eat the ring. I think that's genius. It's like we all need to move forward and come up with these innovative ideas to prevent this from happening. So what are some of these solutions that your organizations are working on to combat marine debris?
I think Katie touched on several of those, but I did want to make kind of a plug for our marine debris monitoring and assessment project. So again, if you go to our website, it's under the research header. And so this was a project that was initiated as a result of the Japan tsunami in 2011 that I mentioned before. And our partners were really interested, our partners on the West Coast were interested in determining what kind of debris was on their shorelines already to serve as a baseline before the potential influx of debris from the Japan tsunami. And so our staff developed some rapid assessment protocols so folks could go out on their shorelines on the West Coast of the US and do some marine debris counts and get a handle on what was out there. And so that project has been around for a while now, and just at the beginning of this month, we launched an online toolbox for that project. It's called the Get Started Toolbox. And so it's kind of a one-stop shop online for folks who participate in the monitoring project, as Katie's group does, where they can find all the tools that they need to get started if they're not yet a partner, or to continue being a partner. Things like all the data sheets can be found there, and the field manual, and a photo field guide. Folks sometimes are not sure what to call a piece of debris when they find it, so there's a nice handy field guide they can look at. There's a video tutorial for folks who are interested in getting involved in the project, so they can watch the tutorial and figure out what exactly is involved. How do we actually monitor on the beach? So I would encourage folks to get involved. If you don't want to take on something as large as being an official part of the monitoring project, just participating in beach cleanups in your area, even if you don't live on the coastline, participating in a cleanup wherever you live, because as we've, has been a theme in this discussion, it can end up in the ocean, and oftentimes it does.
Right. And just looking back at that top 10 list that's collected by the International Coastal Cleanup Volunteers, that tells you a lot of what we could do. We can say no to straws, for example. Most people really don't absolutely need a straw. Smokers can use pocket ashtrays, or there are also ashtrays that you can buy for your car, since cars don't have ashtrays built into them anymore. I mean, if smokers stop littering, if people who eat and drink stop littering, or if they go to reusable water bottles and reusable shopping bags. This top 10 list gives us a lot of answers.
Right. So again, let's show that reusable water bottle. This one, if we can go here, show her this versus this.
There we go.
See, you're reusable. the plastic. Use reusable.
And if you have to use single-use disposable, make sure you get it recycled.
Right. Recycle, recycle, recycle.
I think it's important when we talk about recycling too to make sure you understand the recycling policies in your area, because they vary. They vary across states, they vary across communities within states. So really find out what is and is not recyclable in your community, and so that you know, because it can be a problem for the recycling industry when things are mixed, commingled, some can't be recycled and some can, so it does create problems for that industry. So knowing the rules and regulations in your area is really important for recycling.
Very important. You know, such a large problem, but so completely preventable.
Absolutely.
So completely
preventable. We caused
preventable.
it, we can solve it.
Right. Reduce, reuse, recycle. Thanks, ladies, so much for joining me today and discussing this incredibly important topic. You can learn more about NOAA's Marine Debris Program at marinedebris.noaa.gov and about the Clean Virginia Waterways Program at longwood.edu/cleanva. At 11:15 a.m., Chow will continue discussing this issue with a panel on turning trash into cash, innovation and industry leadership. We'll be back with Capitol Hill Ocean Talk at 12:15 with a panel on ocean acidification. But before we go, I want to extend a special thank you to our presenting sponsors, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the U.S. Department of the Interior, and the Walton Family Foundation. The co-hosts of Chow, the Campbell Foundation and the Gordon Betty Moore Foundation, and all the sponsors, because without their support, the success and accessibility of Chow would not be possible. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you right back here at 12:15.